Pizza Power!
Ah, Konami. Just hearing the name feels like slamming a quarter into an arcade machine and bracing for epic levels of pixelated glory. This gaming powerhouse has been behind some of the most iconic, addictive, and downright insane arcade titles to ever gobble up our allowance money. Whether it's dodging bullets in a side-scrolling shooter, button mashing through a beat-em-up, or dancing like nobody's watching, spoiler, someone is always watching in arcades, Konami has served up decades of gaming gold. Today, we're strapping on our retro goggles and taking a high-score journey through the 50 best Konami arcade games. From classics that redefine genres to hidden gems that deserve more love, this list has it all. So grab your joystick, summon your inner gamer, and get ready for a nostalgia overload that'll leave you yelling, "Just one more continue!" Let's dive into the coin-chomping chaos. Contra, 1987. It's 1987 and you've just dropped a quarter into what's about to become the most sweat-inducing, pulse-pounding shooter of your arcade life. Contra wasn't just another run-and-gun game, it was the run-and-gun game that would make your palms sweaty and your heart race faster than a caffeinated cheetah. Bill and Lance, our muscle-bound heroes who clearly never skipped arm day, took on an alien invasion with enough firepower to make Arnold Schwarzenegger jealous. The game threw everything but the kitchen sink at players, side-scrolling levels that demanded pixel-perfect jumps, vertical climbing sections that tested your trigger finger, and those infamous pseudo 3D base infiltration stages that made everyone feel like they were starring in their own action movie. The spread gun became the holy grail of power-ups, turning even the most novice player into a walking arsenal of destruction. But what really made Contra special was its brutal yet fair difficulty curve. Sure, one hit meant game over, but with practice, and probably your entire allowance in quarters, you could master those patterns and feel like a genuine arcade god. The co-op play added another layer of chaos, leading to either beautiful teamwork or hilarious friendly fire incidents that tested many friendships. The game's Japanese version actually takes place in the year 2633 on a fictional archipelago near New Zealand, but Konami changed the setting to present-day South America for the Western release, probably thinking alien fighting commandos in the future might be too much for our minds to handle. Talk about lost in translation.
Pizza Power!
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, 1993. Cowabunga, dudes. When Shredder and Krang decide to steal the Statue of Liberty because apparently regular-sized trophies weren't good enough, our half-shell heroes find themselves thrown through time faster than you can say pizza time. This radical beat-em-up took everything awesome about the original TMNT arcade game and cranked it up to 11, sending players on a tubular time-traveling adventure from prehistoric dinosaur days to a futuristic starbase. The game's most memorable innovation was letting players grab foot soldiers and hurl them straight into the screen, a move that became so iconic it influenced beat-em-ups for years to come. Each turtle brought their own unique fighting style to the table, with Raphael being the powerhouse but slow, while Michelangelo was the fastest but with shorter range. The game featured some seriously gnarly stages, including the infamous Neon Knight Riders level that used the SNES's Mode 7 graphics to create a pseudo 3D skateboarding sequence that blew players' minds. The SNES version actually added several new bosses not present in the arcade version, including Slash, replacing Cement Man in the prehistoric level, and the final battle was changed to feature Super Shredder from Secret of the Ooze instead of regular Shredder. This wasn't just another licensed game, it was a shell-shocking masterpiece that perfectly captured the essence of both the beloved cartoon series and what made arcade gaming radical in the early 90s. X-Men, the arcade game, 1992. When Konami dropped this mutant masterpiece in arcades, it wasn't just another beat-em-up, it was a six-player symphony of superhero chaos that made every other cabinet look puny by comparison. With its massive dual-screen setup, a true technological flex for 1992, this game let you and 5 buddies team up as Cyclops, Colossus, Wolverine, Storm, Nightcrawler, or Dazzler to take down Magneto and his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. The game perfectly captured the essence of the 1989 Pride of the X-Men cartoon aesthetic, with large, colourful sprites that made every optic blast and adamantium slash feel spectacular. Each character brought their unique mutant powers to the table, though using these abilities would cost you precious health points. A clever trade-off that made you think twice before unleashing that devastating storm or berserker rage. The game threw everything from armies of Sentinels to classic villains like Pyro, Blob and Juggernaut at players, leading up to an epic showdown with Magneto in his Asteroid M base. Here's a fascinating tidbit that X-Men fans still chuckle about. While Dazzler might seem like an odd choice for the roster and was actually the weakest character in the game, she was included because she had a brief surge of popularity in the 80s comics. Many fans argue that Jean Grey, Rogue or Psylocke would have made more sense, but Dazzler's disco-powered light shows became an unexpected fan favourite 3. The game was such a hit that it became one of the top 5 highest-grossing arcade games of 1992 in the United States, and even earned a nomination for Most Innovative New Technology from the Amusement and Music Operators Association. The Simpsons, 1991. This 4-player beat-em-up masterpiece somehow managed to perfectly capture the chaotic energy of Springfield's first family. The plot kicks off when Smithers, in a hilariously out-of-character moment, steals a precious diamond for Mr. Burns, only to collide with Homer and accidentally lose it to baby Maggie, who starts using it as a pacifier. What follows is a wild chase through Springfield that would make even the most hardened arcade veteran reach for their quarters. Each Simpson brings their unique fighting style to the table. Homer throws punches like a pro wrestler who's had one too many Duff beers. Marge weaponizes her vacuum cleaner because apparently housework can be hazardous. Bart turns his skateboard into an instrument of justice, and Lisa proves that a jump rope can be just as effective as any martial arts weapon. The game sends players through 8 distinctly Springfield locations, from down to Krusty Land, each packed with more references than you can shake a donut at. The boss battles are particularly memorable, featuring everything from a hot air balloon shaped like Krusty to a drunk at Moe's Tavern who clearly didn't appreciate being cut off. Between stages, players can compete in hilarious mini-games like balloon inflation contests, adding that extra sprinkle of competitive fun to the family chaos 3. What really set this game apart was its commercial success. It became one of the top 3 best-selling arcade games of 1991, proving that America's favourite dysfunctional family could dominate any medium they touched. Here's a fascinating tidbit. The game features the actual voices of the show's cast, including Dan Castellaneta and Julie Kavner, making it one of the first arcade games to feature authentic voice acting from a TV show's original cast. Sunset Riders, 1991. Saddle up, partners! Konami didn't just make another shoot 'em up, they created a rootin'-tootin' masterpiece that would make even Clint Eastwood tip his hat in approval. This side-scrolling gunslinger puts you in the boots of 4 bounty hunters, Steve, Billy, Bob and Cormano, who are out to claim rewards on the West's most notorious outlaws. Think of it as a spaghetti western where the pasta's been replaced with pure arcade adrenaline. The game serves up a delicious plate of non-stop action across 8 stages of pure western mayhem. You'll find yourself doing everything from riding horseback while dodging dynamite-throwing bandits to hopping aboard speeding trains packed with outlaws. Each character brings their own firepower to the showdown. Steve and Billy pack trusty revolvers, while Bob and Cormano prefer the up-close and personal approach with their shotguns. The controls are tighter than a new pair of cowboy boots, letting you slide under bullets, jump between platforms, and even mount your horse with the grace of a seasoned wrangler. The game throws everything but the kitchen sink at you, stampeding bulls, enemy ambushes, and boss fights that'll test your trigger finger faster than a rattlesnake's strike. While the arcade version came in both 2-player and 4-player variants, the home console ports had to make some interesting compromises. The Genesis version actually cut 2 of the playable characters, Steve and Bob, and gave the remaining gunslingers surnames they never had in the arcade. Billy Cool and Cormano Wild. Talk about an identity crisis in the Old West. Dance Dance Revolution 1998. Konami sparked a cultural revolution that would transform gaming from a finger-tapping experience to a full-body workout extravaganza. Dance Dance Revolution burst onto the scene with its iconic 4-panel dance pad and a simple yet addictive premise. Step on the arrows in time with the music, try not to fall on your face, and look somewhat cool doing it. The gameplay was deceptively straightforward. Arrows scroll upward on the screen, and players had to stomp on corresponding arrows on the dance platform when they reached the top. But don't let that simplicity fool you. DDR introduced a scoring system that would make perfectionists lose sleep, with judgments ranging from perfect to the soul-crushing boo and miss. The game featured different play modes, from easy for the rhythmically challenged to hard for those who apparently had springs for legs, and even introduced the double mode for brave souls who wanted to control all 8 panels by themselves. What really set DDR apart was its brilliant fusion of gaming and physical activity. Players could choose from various characters, and the game showed off different dance styles including hip-hop, funk, lock, and even capoeira, making it feel like a virtual dance class minus the judgmental instructor. DDR became such a phenomenon that it was one of the first arcade games to establish a genuine competitive scene, with players developing their own techniques and terminology. The game was so successful that it spawned countless sequels and became one of the longest-running arcade series in history. Gradius 1985. This game revolutionized the shoot-'em-up genre while influencing gaming for decades to come. Enter Gradius, where players pilot the iconic Vic Viper spacecraft through a gauntlet of alien hostiles in what would become one of the most innovative horizontal shooters ever created. What set Gradius apart was its groundbreaking power-up system. Instead of simply grabbing upgrades and hoping for the best, players collected capsules to move a cursor through a power-up menu, strategically choosing their arsenal. Speed up, missiles, lasers, options, those faithful little companion ships, and shields. Picking the right upgrade at the right time was often the difference between victory and that dreaded game over screen. The game's boss battles introduced a formula that would become legendary in the shooter genre. These massive mechanical monstrosities featured vulnerable blue cores protected by regenerating shields, requiring players to carefully time their shots through narrow corridors while dodging countless projectiles. It's like trying to thread a needle while riding a motorcycle through a hurricane. Sounds impossible, but somehow players kept coming back for more. Speaking of coming back, Gradius was such a smash hit that it dominated the arcade scene, becoming one of Japan's top 5 table arcade games in 1986 and the highest grossing arcade game in London that same year. During development, the team tested over 20 different movement patterns just for the option satellites before settling on the perfect one. The game's visual style was heavily influenced by films like Star Wars and Lensman, with the latter directly inspiring the iconic laser weapon. Frogger 1981. Konami created what would become one of gaming's most endearing classics. This deceptively simple tale of an ambitious amphibian trying to cross a busy road became an instant hit that had players dropping quarters faster than our green hero dropped into the river. The game's premise is beautifully straightforward. Guide your frog from the bottom of the screen to one of 5 lily pad homes at the top. But between you and domestic bliss lies a gauntlet that would make even the most seasoned frog think twice about leaving the pond. The bottom half of the screen features lanes of speeding vehicles, from sleek sports cars to massive trucks, all seemingly determined to turn your frog into a green pancake. Make it past the asphalt jungle and you're rewarded with an even trickier challenge, crossing a treacherous river. Here, you'll need to hop across logs, turtles, who have an annoying habit of diving underwater, and even the occasional alligator's back. Time your jumps wrong and it's Splash City. Adding to the fun are bonus insects that appear in the home, tempting players to risk it all for extra points. The game's scoring system is surprisingly deep for its era. Each forward hop nets you 10 points, while getting a frog home safely awards 50. But the real pros know that escorting a lady frog home or snagging a tasty fly earns a sweet 200 points. Complete all 5 homes and you're looking at a cool 1,000 point bonus. Here's a fascinating tidbit. By 2005, Frogger had sold an incredible 20 million copies across across its various home versions, making it one of the most successful arcade game adaptations of all time. The game's simple charm and addictive gameplay proved that sometimes the best concepts are the ones that make you go, "Why didn't I think of that?" right before your frog gets squashed by a bulldozer. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, 1989. This four-player cabinet let friends team up as Leonardo, Raphael, Michelangelo, and Donatello to save April O'Neil and Master Splinter from the clutches of Shredder and Krang. The gameplay was a masterclass in arcade design, featuring Konami's signature 2.5-dimension approach to side-scrolling action that let players move up and down the screen while beating up foot soldiers. Each turtle brought their unique fighting style and weapon to the party. Donatello's bow staff had reach but was slower, while Raphael's sais were quick but required getting up close and personal with enemies. What really made this game special was how it captured the essence of the cartoon series that was taking the world by storm. The colourful graphics, authentic voice clips, and that infectious soundtrack had kids begging their parents for more quarters. The game threw everything from basic foot soldiers to classic villains like Bebop, Rocksteady, and even a giant Krang at players. This game was such a massive hit that it became the highest-grossing dedicated arcade game of 1990 in the United States. In fact, during November and December of that year, each cabinet was averaging $163 per week in quarters. That's a lot of pizza money. The game was particularly successful in Australia, where it maintained high earnings for an unusually long time, breaking the typical pattern of licensed games that usually faded after a few months. Super Contra, 1988. 1 year after Bill and Lance saved Earth from alien invaders, our muscle-bound heroes find themselves facing an even bigger threat. Their own military base has been taken over by alien forces. Super Contra cranked up everything that made the original great and added a fresh perspective, quite literally, by introducing top-down shooting stages alongside the classic side-scrolling action. The game's signature weapon upgrade system returned with a vengeance, letting players collect power-ups to transform their standard issue pea shooter into everything from spread guns to laser beams. But what really set Super Contra apart was its versatile jump mechanics. Players could now control their jump height by holding the button longer, adding a new layer of strategy to both combat and platforming. Each stage was a masterclass in action game design, alternating between side view and top view perspectives to keep players on their toes. The military base setting gave way to alien-infested jungles and eventually otherworldly lairs filled with biomechanical horrors. The game's difficulty was legendary. One hit still meant instant death, and those alien forces weren't exactly known for their hospitality. While most players know the iconic Konami code from the original Contra, Super Contra actually had its own version. In the NES port, known as Super C in North America, entering the code would give players 10 lives instead of the usual 30, making an already challenging game even more brutal. Talk about tough love. Salamander, 1986. This innovative blaster alternated between horizontal and vertical scrolling stages, introducing a fresh perspective that kept pilots on their toes. Think of it as the Swiss Army knife of shoot-'em-ups, versatile, precise, and packed with features. The game's weapon system was brilliantly streamlined compared to its predecessor. Instead of fiddling with a power-up bar, players could instantly activate modules dropped by enemies. Each power-up served a specific purpose, from speed boosts to ripple lasers that created expanding energy rings. You could stack up to 4 multiple orbs that mimicked your weapons, turning your ship into a flying fortress of destruction. The level design was where Salamander truly shined. The first stage introduced organic obstacles that grew before your eyes, while the infamous third stage featured deadly solar flares erupting from above and below. These weren't just pretty backgrounds, they were active threats that required quick thinking and precise maneuvering. delivering. Salamander actually inspired the creation of the Danmaku bullet hell subgenre. Game designer Ikeda Tsunemoto was so impressed by Salamander's shot patterns that he later developed them into the signature style seen in games like Donpachi. The game's Japanese title contains a clever wordplay too. The kanji Saramanda translates to Sandgore's wide snake, showing how even the name was crafted with artistic flair. Blades of Steel, 1987. Looking for a title that perfectly balanced arcade action with bone-crushing fights? This one is for you. This wasn't your typical sports simulation. It was a high-octane mix of slick skating, precise passing, and the occasional throwing of gloves that had players pumping quarters into arcade machines faster than a Zamboni clearing the ice. The gameplay was a masterclass in accessibility meets depth. Players could execute crisp passes, unleash blistering shots, and engage in what became the game's signature feature, fighting. Unlike modern hockey games where fighting feels tacked on, Blades of Steel made it an integral part of the experience. When two players bumped into each other 3 times in succession, the gloves would drop and a unique minigame would commence. The loser didn't just lose face, they earned themselves a cozy spot in the penalty box, creating a power play opportunity. What really set this game apart was its attention to detail and innovative features. The game featured distinct voice samples, which were rare for its time, including the iconic Blades of Steel announcement at the title screen and the fight call when brawls broke out. The second intermission even featured a playable minigame that doubled as an advertisement for other Konami titles. Talk about metagaming before it was cool. Blades of Steel actually differed significantly from real NHL rules of the late 1980s. In a quirky twist, only the loser of a fight would get penalized, and if a fight broke out near the goal, it would result in a penalty shot, a creative interpretation of hockey rules that somehow made the game even more entertaining. The game was such a hit that it became one of the most successful arcade-to-home conversions of its era, proving that sometimes breaking the rules is exactly what the game needs. Metamorphic Force, 1993. In this beast of a beat-em-up, Konami took the genre in a wild new direction by letting players transform into powerful anthropomorphic animals. 4 heroes chosen by the Greek goddess Athena must stop the evil King Death Shadow from ruling the world, and they're packing some serious animalistic attitude to get the job done. The gameplay puts a unique spin on the traditional beat-em-up formula by introducing the Beast Mode transformation system. Players can collect golden statues from either falling chests or a mischievous rodent, think Golden Axe's annoying dwarf but actually helpful, to transform into powerful animal forms. Time these transformations right, and you can unleash devastating screen-clearing attacks that make short work of enemy hordes. The game's rogues gallery is equally creative, featuring everything from frogmen to elephant warriors, and bosses that include a ram man wielding a massive scythe and, because why not, a sword-wielding flaming chicken man. The stages themselves feel like a fever dream of mythological proportions, culminating in an epic showdown in Death Shadow's castle. The US and Japanese versions of the game are significantly different. The US version features a unique life point system that doubles as a timer, similar to Gauntlet, while the Japanese version uses a traditional health bar. The US version also includes an extra boss rush in the 5th stage, where players must face previous bosses in pairs, making an already challenging game even more intense.
Silent Scope.
Silent Scope, 1999. With this next game, an entire sniper fantasy was created that would make even the most hardened marksman sweat. Silent Scope transformed arcade goers into elite snipers through its innovative mounted rifle peripheral with an actual working scope display, making it stand out in the crowded shooter genre of the late 90s. The game puts players in the crosshairs of an intense anti-terrorist operation where precision and timing are everything. You're tasked with rescuing the the president's family from a group of terrorists who clearly didn't get the memo about messing with America's first family. The gameplay brilliantly balances between two views, the main arcade screen showing the overall action and a zoomed-in scope view that displays your precise targeting area. What made Silent Scope truly special was its variety of missions. One moment you're perched atop a skyscraper picking off bad guys, the next you're racing down a highway trying to nail targets from a moving vehicle. The game even throws in some night vision segments where you're parachuting into enemy territory because apparently regular sniping wasn't challenging enough. Silent Scope included a rather unique health restoration system. Players could recover lost health by spotting and zooming in on certain interesting side events during missions. It was Konami's cheeky way of rewarding observant players, though some might argue it was just an excuse to include some questionable Easter eggs. Aliens, 1990. Adapting from James Cameron's sci-fi horror and turning it into masterpiece into an arcade game, Konami crafted an intense run-and-gun experience that captured the film's pulse-pounding action while adding their own arcade flair. This side-scrolling shooter let players step into the boots of either Ellen Ripley or Corporal Hicks in their battle against the Xenomorph menace. The game brilliantly mixed up its gameplay styles to keep the action fresh. While primarily a side-scrolling shooter, it frequently switched to third-person rail shooter segments that had players frantically blasting aliens rushing from the background. The radar system at the top of the screen added an extra layer of tension, warning players of incoming threats before they appeared, a clever nod to the movie's famous motion tracker scenes. What made Aliens truly special was its weapon variety and environmental design. Players started with a standard smart gun, but could upgrade to flamethrowers, missile launchers, and grenade launchers. The stages featured multiple paths with different hazards, keeping players on their toes as they navigated through military bases and alien-infested territories. The game's crowning achievement was letting players climb into the power loader exoskeleton for some close-quarters combat with the aliens, though the punching-only combat style made these segments delightfully awkward and intense. Aliens made its worldwide debut at the Amusement Trades Exhibition International in London and went on to become Konami's second best-selling arcade game of 1990, right behind Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The game earned a Silver Award from the American Amusement Machine Association for its impressive sales performance. Track and Field, 1984. This game tests players' athletic prowess and the durability of arcade cabinet buttons everywhere. Track and Field revolutionized sports gaming by introducing a simple yet addictive control scheme that would influence sports games for decades to come. The gameplay centered around 2 run buttons and 1 action button, creating what would become the standard formula for sports gaming. Players had to rapidly tap the run buttons to build up speed in events like the 100-meter dash, while timing their action button presses perfectly for field events. This seemingly simple control scheme led to some creative techniques from players, from using rulers to credit cards to achieve superhuman button mashing speeds, causing so much damage that arcade operators had to modify their machines with button guards. The game featured 6 Olympic events that tested different skills. Each event had a qualifying time or distance that players needed to achieve to advance. Fail to qualify and you'd lose a precious life. The genius of the design was in its accessibility. Anyone could understand how to play, but mastering the precise timing and rhythm required for top scores kept players feeding quarters into the machine. Track and Field became such a massive commercial success that it ranked as one of the most successful arcade games of 1984. The game's popularity led to countless players developing creative ways to achieve high scores, including the infamous ping-pong ball technique, which became so widespread that later versions of the cabinet had to be specifically modified to prevent such exploits. Castlevania, 1907. This game was created for a more challenging version of Simon Belmont's iconic adventure that would make even hardcore Castlevania fans break into a cold sweat. The VS System version took everything that made the NES original intense and cranked it up to 11. The game follows the same basic premise as its NES counterpart. Simon Belmont, armed with his legendary vampire killer whip, must battle through Dracula's castle to defeat the Prince of Darkness himself. However, this arcade version features significantly tougher enemy placement and more aggressive monster behavior. The controls maintain that signature stiff but precise feel, where every jump and whip crack must be carefully calculated. The game features clearer graphics than its NES counterpart, with more vibrant colors and smoother animations. The music remains hauntingly memorable, though with slightly improved sound quality thanks to the arcade hardware. The game's difficulty was intentionally increased to ensure players would keep feeding quarters into the machine. Enemies deal more damage, hearts are scarcer, and boss battles are more challenging. BS. Castlevania was notorious for its tendency to crash when players used too many boomerang crosses in areas with multiple enemies and candles. This glitch became so well known that arcade operators had to warn players not to spam the boomerang weapon in certain sections of the game. The game's increased difficulty and arcade-specific adjustments made it a unique challenge even for players who had mastered the NES version. Gradius III, 1989. Gradius 3 took everything that made its predecessors great and cranked up both the innovation and the difficulty to near-sadistic levels. The game introduced an unprecedented level of customization through its weapon edit mode, letting players create their own ideal loadout for the Vic Viper spacecraft. This wasn't just about picking between lasers and spread shots anymore. Players could mix and match different missile types, shield configurations, and special weapons to create their perfect fighting machine. The power-up system remained faithful to the series' roots, with the iconic selection bar that became a template for countless shooters to follow. What really set Gradius III apart was its ambitious level design. The game threw everything from organic alien hives to crystal mazes at players, with the infamous Crystal Zone becoming particularly notorious for its stunning visuals and brutal difficulty. Each stage introduced new mechanical challenges, like the innovative behind-the-ship view segments that broke up the traditional side-scrolling action. The game was so notoriously difficult in arcades that when it was ported to the Super Nintendo, the developers intentionally slowed down certain sections to make them more manageable. The SNES version's slowdown, originally seen as a technical limitation, actually became a beloved feature that made some of the more brutal sections playable for mere mortals. Time Pilot, 1983. This one is a unique time-traveling aerial combat game that put players in control of a futuristic jet fighter zipping through different eras of aviation history. Unlike traditional shooters that scrolled horizontally or vertically, Time Pilot placed your aircraft at the center of the screen while the world rotated around you in glorious 360-degree freedom. The game cleverly divided its action across 5 distinct time periods, each with its own unique challenges. Starting in 1910, battling WWI biplanes, players progressed through Wubbo-II fighters, Vietnam-era helicopters, modern jets, and finally faced off against UFOs in the far future. Each era required different tactics. Those biplanes might be slow, but they moved in unpredictable patterns, while those modern jets would try to outmaneuver you with heat-seeking missiles. Between dogfights, players could save parachuting pilots for bonus points, adding a humanitarian touch to all the aerial combat. The game's difficulty progression was masterfully crafted, with each era introducing new enemy patterns and weapons while maintaining that perfect balance between challenge and fairability. Time Pilot was actually created by Yoshiki Okamoto, who was originally hired by Konami as a graphic artist and tasked with making a driving simulator. Instead of following orders, he secretly based his game on Bosconian, developed a driving game simultaneously as a backup, and only showed his boss Time Pilot when asked about the driving game. Despite initially angering his supervisor, the game's success in location testing proved Okamoto's instincts correct. He would later go on to create legendary titles like Street Fighter and Final Fight at Capcom. Yi Ar Kung Fu, 1995. Taking inspiration from Bruce Lee's action films, Ye Ar Kung Fu put players in control of Oolong, a martial artist who could make Bruce Lee's own moves look tame in comparison. Unlike its contemporary Karate Champ, which focused on realistic martial arts, Ye Ar Kung Fu pushed the boundaries with fantastical action and high-flying moves. The game introduced the now standard health meter system, replacing the traditional point-scoring approach that fighting games had used until then. Each fighter had their own life bar that would deplete with successful hits, leading to a knockout when emptied. The game's roster of opponents was delightfully diverse, with each fighter bringing their own unique fighting style and weapons to the arena. Players had to face everything from traditional martial artists to weapon masters wielding chains, clubs, and even fans. The game was divided into 2 distinct levels: Hot Fighting History, set in a cave with 5 opponents, and Master Hand History, staged outside a palace with 6 increasingly challenging foes. Ye Ar Kung Fu became such a massive commercial success that it ended up being the highest-grossing arcade conversion kit of 1985 in the United States. The game's influence extended well beyond its time, becoming the best-selling home video game of 1986 in the United Kingdom. Gyruss, 1983. When Konami decided to put a literal spin on the space shooter genre, they created Gyruss, a unique tube shooter that combined the circular motion of Tempest with the frantic, alien-blasting action of Galaga, all set to a synthesized version of Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. This wasn't just another space shooter, it was a ballet of bullets performed in the round. The game's innovative design placed players on the outer edge of a circular playfield, shooting inward toward a central vanishing point, while rotating clockwise or counterclockwise. Your ship could move around the perimeter of the screen, while waves of enemies emerged from the center, creating a dizzying dance of dodge and destroy. The 3D effect of enemies approaching from the distance was mind-blowing for its time, creating an illusion of depth that made players feel like they were truly traveling through space. What made Gyruss particularly special was its tour of the solar system concept. Starting at Neptune, players would fight their way through each planet's sector, eventually reaching Earth. Between planets, players could earn bonus points in special stages by shooting down formations of enemies, similar to Galaga's challenging stages, but with that signature circular twist. Gyruss was actually designed by Yoshiki Okamoto, who later created Time Pilot, and was his last game for Konami before moving to Capcom. The game's unique musical choice of Bach's Toccata and Fugue was revolutionary for its time. It was one of the first arcade games to feature a fully synthesized version of classical music, using 5 sound channels when most games of the era only used 3 or 4. Circus Charlie, 1984. This colourful arcade adventure featured 6 distinct circus acts, each requiring different skills and perfect timing. The game's brilliance lay in its variety of performances. In the first act, Charlie rides a lion through flaming hoops, because regular lion riding wasn't exciting enough. The second act puts him on a tightrope, dodging mischievous monkeys who clearly didn't get the memo about professional courtesy. The trampoline stage has him bouncing between platforms while avoiding knife throwers and fire breathers, while the ball walking stage tests players' balance as Charlie hops between giant spheres. What made Circus Charlie particularly special was its hidden depth. Each stage contained secret bonuses and tricks that rewarded skilled players. For example, performing a backward jump through a fire ring could spawn an extra life, and collecting all money bags in certain stages would trigger a bonus bird that showered Charlie with coins. The horse riding and trapeze acts rounded out the show, with the latter featuring a particularly charming ending where a successful landing earned Charlie a kiss that made him split into multiple Celebrating Clowns 3. The game's soundtrack featured arrangements of 2 classical pieces, American Patrol and The Blue Danube, making it one of the earlier arcade games to adapt classical music for its soundtrack. The game was such a hit in Japan that it ranked as the 3rd most successful table arcade unit in May 1984. Sexy Parodius, 1996. When Konami decided to give their Gradius series a cheeky makeover, they created what might be the most bizarre shoot-'em-up ever to grace the arcade scene. Sexy Parodius took the serious space shooting action of Gradius and transformed it into a Technicolor carnival of absurdity, complete with penguin protagonists, dancing Vegas showgirls, and enemy ships shaped like, well, let's just say they got creative with the designs. The game maintained the core Gradius power-up system, but threw conventional design out the window. Players could choose from 8 different characters, each with their own unique weapons and abilities. Want to play as a missile-launching penguin? Done. Prefer a gothic witch who shoots cats? They've got you covered. The traditional space battles were replaced with stages featuring everything from Las Vegas casinos to hot springs filled with bathing animals. What made Sexy Parodius particularly interesting was its branching path system based on mission objectives. Each stage had specific goals beyond simple survival. Failing or succeeding these missions would determine which path you'd take through the game. These objectives ranged from collecting coins to defeating specific enemies, adding a strategic layer to the chaos. Sexy Parodius was actually the first game in the series to feature simultaneous 2-player action, though it never received an official Western release due to its suggestive content. The game's soundtrack became particularly famous among fans for its remixed versions of classical music pieces, including a memorable take on Tchaikovsky's Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, played during a stage featuring dancing Vegas showgirl penguins. Jackal, 1986. This wasn't just another military shooter. It was a perfect combo of vehicular combat and rescue operations that would influence action games for years to come. The game put players in control of an elite special forces unit known as Jackal, comprising Colonel Decker, Lieutenant Bob, Sergeant Quint, and Corporal Grey. These hardened soldiers were tasked with driving their armed jeeps deep into hostile territory to rescue captured allies. The gameplay masterfully balanced combat with rescue operations. Your jeep could carry up to 8 prisoners at a time before needing to escort them to an extraction point where helicopters waited to whisk them to safety. What made Jackal particularly innovative was its unique weapon system. Your jeep came equipped with a fixed, upward-firing machine gun for primary attacks and a directional grenade launcher as secondary fire. This dual weapon setup created interesting tactical decisions. Players could either maintain mobility while firing the machine gun or face enemies directly to lob grenades their way. The game's environment was one continuous battleground that took players through various terrains, from beach landings to ancient ruins and finally to the enemy headquarters. Each area presented new challenges and enemy types, from basic infantry to tanks, helicopters, and gun emplacements. Jackal was originally designed to use rotary joysticks similar to Ikari Warriors, allowing players to aim their turret in any direction while driving. However, this version only received limited market testing before Konami opted for a standard 8-way joystick for the wide release. Double Dribble, 1986. This next game was like putting a ball through a hoop, but it was more about creating an authentic basketball experience complete with dramatic cutscenes that would make even non-sports fans stop and stare. The game featured 4 fictional teams: the Boston Frogs, New York Eagles, Chicago Ox, and Los Angeles Breakers, each with their own distinct colours but identical stats. While modern gamers might scoff at such simplicity, Double Dribble's innovation lay in its presentation and gameplay mechanics. The game's signature feature was its cinematic cutscenes showing dramatic slam dunks, making it one of the first games to feature such dynamic camera transitions. What made Double Dribble particularly interesting was its hotspots system, specific areas on the court where shots were more likely to go in. Skilled players quickly discovered these sweet spots, including the infamous 3-point glitch, where shooting from the upper right-hand corner of the court would guarantee a basket won. This unintended feature became such common knowledge that it transformed multiplayer matches into strategic battles to control these prime shooting positions. The original arcade version featured a vocal rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner before each game, which was quite impressive for its time. The game also pioneered the use of digitized speech in arcade games, though limited to phrases like announcing the game title, foul calls. Bucky O'Hare, 1992. This side-scrolling shooter perfectly captured the weird and wonderful essence of the animated series. This wasn't just another licensed game, it was a 4-player cooperative blast through the Aniverse that gave players a chance to fight the evil Toad Empire with style. Players can choose from 4 characters: Bucky O'Hare himself with his balanced abilities, Jenny with her psychic powers, Deadeye Duck with his 4-way shot, and Blinky the android with his powerful laser. Jenny could float and shoot psychic bolts, while Deadeye Duck could fire in multiple directions, perfect for those pesky enemies attacking from awkward angles. Each stage was packed with references to the animated series, from the climate-controlled Toad mothership to Warren, the industrial planet. The game featured some innovative mechanics for its time, including the ability to charge shots for more powerful attacks, and a smart bomb system that let players clear the screen when things got too hectic. The arcade version actually included plot elements and characters that never appeared in the animated series. The game's final boss, the Climate Converter, was an original creation that became so popular among fans that it was later referenced in Bucky O'Hare merchandise. Additionally, the game featured some of the most impressive voice sampling for its time, with each character having multiple unique voice clips, a rarity for 1992 arcade games. Haunted Castle, 1988. Castlevania to the arcade scene might be the most brutally difficult entry in the vampire hunting series. Haunted Castle took the familiar tale of Simon Belmont rescuing his bride from Dracula and turned it into a quarter-munching gauntlet that would make even hardened arcade veterans break into a cold sweat. The game maintained the classic Castlevania formula, Simon wielding his trusty whip against supernatural horrors, but cranked everything up to 11. The sprites were massive for their time, with Simon standing nearly a third of the screen height, making dodging enemies a particularly challenging endeavour. The weapons system introduced some interesting variations on classic sub-weapons, including a cross that could be charged up for increased damage, and a unique bomb item that could clear entire screens of enemies. 1 or 2 hits could end your run, and the placement of enemies seemed deliberately designed to cause maximum frustration. The game featured 6 stages of pure horror, each culminating in boss battles that would make modern Dark Souls players feel right at home. The music, however, was a standout feature, introducing arcade-quality versions of now classic Castlevania tunes like Bloody Tears. Haunted Castle was so difficult that many arcade operators actually complained to Konami about it being too hard, leading to some locations receiving modified ROM chips that slightly reduced the difficulty. The game's development team actually included several members who would later work on the legendary Castlevania, Symphony of the Night, and you can spot early versions of some SOT-N design elements in Haunted Castle's stages. Ajax, 1987. This is a game that seamlessly mixes traditional top-down shooting with pseudo 3D segments that would make your head spin. This wasn't just another shoot-'em-up, it was a technical marvel that pushed arcade hardware to its limits. The game's most innovative feature was its dynamic perspective switching. Players would transition from traditional vertical scrolling segments to behind-the-aircraft 3D sequences, creating a variety of gameplay experiences within a single mission. Your fighter jet came equipped with both air-to-air and air-to-ground weapons, requiring strategic weapon switching to tackle different enemy types. The power-up system let players enhance their arsenal with heat-seeking missiles, spread shots, and screen-clearing bombs. What made Ajax particularly special was its environmental variety. One moment you're soaring through cloud-filled skies, the next you're skimming across desert landscapes or weaving through urban canyons of futuristic cities. The game's difficulty progression was masterfully crafted, introducing new enemy patterns and attack formations that kept players on their toes without feeling unfair. Ajax was one of the first arcade games to feature a smart bomb weapon that could be charged up for increased damage, a mechanic that would become standard in many future shooters. The game's development team actually created two different soundtracks, one for the Japanese release, Typhoon, and another for the Western version, Ajax, with the Japanese version featuring more upbeat, energetic tunes, while the Western release opted for a more serious, military-style soundtrack. Green Beret, 1985. When Konami decided to tackle Cold War tension in arcade form, they created Green Beret, known as Russian Attack in North America, a hard-as-nails run-and-gun game that put players in the boots of elite US Special Forces operatives on a high-stakes rescue mission. It was a knife-wielding dance with death that would influence action games for years to come. The game's premise was simple but effective. Infiltrate a Soviet military base to rescue POWs from execution. Armed with nothing but a combat knife, because apparently the military budget was tight that year, players had to navigate through 4 distinct stages: a marshalling area, harbour, airbase, and the frigid Siberian camp. Each stage culminated in unique ambush encounters, from jump-kicking enemies pouring out of trucks to vicious German shepherds. What made Green Beret particularly intense was its weapon system. While your trusty knife was always available, players could obtain limited-use weapons by defeating specific enemies. These included a devastating 3-shot flamethrower, a 4-shot RPG, and a 3-pack of hand grenades. The game rewarded skilled players with extra lives at specific score thresholds, though reaching them was no easy feat. The game was so well received that critics compared it favourably to Rambo: First Blood Part 2, with Computer Gamer magazine calling it an incredibly violent game that was brilliant to play. The game was considered Konami's answer to Capcom's Commando, though many critics found Green Beret to be the superior title. WEC Le Mans 24, 1986. WEC Le Mans 24 is a groundbreaking racing simulation that pushed the boundaries of what arcade racing games could achieve. It was the first video game to authentically depict the legendary 24 Hours of Le Mans World Endurance Championship. The game's most innovative feature was its dynamic time-of-day system, splitting the iconic Le Mans circuit into 3 distinct sections where players experienced the transition from day to dusk, dusk to night, and night to dawn. This created a uniquely immersive racing experience that captured the essence of endurance racing. The driving mechanics were remarkably advanced for their time, featuring realistic car physics, where vehicles would jump, turn, and spin up to 180 degrees, requiring players to master acceleration, braking, and counter-steering to avoid spin-outs. The tracks were accurately simulated and approved by the Automobile Club de l'Ouest, and the game featured revolutionary force feedback through a vibrating steering wheel that responded to acceleration and off-road bumps. The game was notoriously challenging. The track maintained a constant 3-lane width, and even slight contact with opponents could result in spectacular aerial flips. Konami released 3 different cabinet versions, including a deluxe Big Spin version that would physically rotate players through a full 360 degrees based on their turning direction, housed in a cabinet designed to look like a real prototype C race car. This premium experience came with a premium price tag of £7,000 in 1986, equivalent to about $31,572 in 2024. Road Fighter, 1984. Road Fighter took the simple concept of dodging traffic and turned it into an adrenaline-pumping battle against both the clock and your fuel gauge. The game's genius lay in its perfectly balanced risk-reward system. Players had to maintain high speeds to reach checkpoints before running out of fuel, but faster speeds meant less reaction time to dodge the countless obstacles. Your car came equipped with a turbo boost that could help you catch up when falling behind, but using it burned precious fuel faster. The traffic patterns were deviously designed, with civilian vehicles that would suddenly change lanes without warning, forcing players to develop split-second decision-making skills. The game featured 4 distinct tracks: the country course, the seaside course, the mountain course, and the city course. Each had its own hazards and required different strategies to master. The final stage combined elements from all previous courses into one ultimate challenge. Road Fighter was one of the first racing games to implement a catch-up mechanic, where civilian cars would slow down slightly if players fell too far behind, helping to maintain tension throughout the race. The game's success in Japanese arcades led to it becoming one of Konami's first titles to receive a home console port, though many players found the arcade version's precise controls impossible to replicate on home systems of the era. Pandora's Palace, 1984. When Konami decided to create a platformer inspired by Greek mythology, they produced Pandora's Palace, a unique arcade experience that combined elements of Donkey Kong with mythological creatures and challenging vertical climbing mechanics. This wasn't just another platformer, it was a quirky blend of classical mythology and arcade action that stood out in the crowded gaming landscape of 1984. The game cast players as Perseus, though looking nothing like his mythological counterpart, tasked with climbing the titular palace while avoiding or defeating various mythological monsters. Each level was structured as a vertical maze filled with platforms, ladders, and ropes. The gameplay centered around collecting keys to unlock doors while dodging or confronting enemies like harpies, medusas, and other creatures from Greek mythology. What made it particularly interesting was the ability to pick up and throw rocks at enemies, adding a strategic combat element to the platforming. Players could collect special items that granted temporary invincibility or increased attack power, but the real challenge came from managing your limited resources while racing against the clock. The game featured multiple routes through each level, allowing players to develop different strategies for achieving high scores. Pandora's Palace was one of the few arcade games of its era to feature a continue option that actually affected your final score. Players could continue after losing all lives, but their score would be reset to 0, a harsh penalty that made high-score competitions particularly intense. The game's cabinet art was also notable for its striking contrast between the cute, cartoonish in-game graphics and the more serious classical artwork depicting mythological scenes on the cabinet itself. Iron Horse, 1986. All aboard this Wild West shooter that transformed arcade gaming into a high-stakes train robbery adventure. Iron Horse puts players in the boots of a lone lawman defending a steam locomotive from waves of desperados, combining fast-paced gunslinging action with precise platforming across moving train cars. The game's unique setting made it stand out among its contemporaries. Players had to navigate across the tops, sides, and interiors of a speeding train while fending off bandits who appeared from every conceivable angle. The control scheme brilliantly balanced shooting mechanics with acrobatic movement. You could jump between cars, climb ladders, and even hang from the side of the train while picking off enemies with your six-shooter. Each stage presented new challenges, from standard gun-toting outlaws to knife-throwing assassins and dynamite-wielding demolition experts. Boss battles were especially memorable, featuring showdowns with notorious gang leaders who each had their own attack patterns and weaknesses. The game kept players on their toes by throwing in environmental hazards like low-hanging bridges and tunnel entrances that forced quick decisions between ducking, jumping, or finding alternate routes. Iron Horse featured one of the earliest examples of context-sensitive music in arcade games. The soundtrack would dynamically shift between tense action themes during gunfights and more atmospheric pieces during exploration sections. The game also included a hidden bonus stage accessed by shooting specific objects in sequence, though this secret was so well hidden that many players didn't discover it until years after the game's release. Super Cobra, 1981. Soaring through treacherous cave systems in a heavily armed helicopter, Super Cobra emerged as one of the earliest horizontal scrolling shooters to challenge players with precise navigation and resource management. This spiritual successor to Scramble raised the bar for arcade difficulty while introducing gameplay elements that would become genre standards. The game's brilliance lay in its fuel management system. Players had to constantly monitor their fuel gauge while navigating through 10 increasingly difficult zones, each packed with rockets, UFOs, and various ground-based threats. Strategic bombing of fuel tanks became essential for survival, creating a perfect balance between offensive action and resource collection. One wrong move could send your chopper crashing into the cavern walls or running out of fuel at the worst possible moment. What made Super Cobra particularly challenging was its masterful level design. The game started in relatively open cave systems, but gradually introduced tighter corridors, moving obstacles, and devious enemy placement. The final mission required players to navigate through a base, grab a load of secret documents, and escape, all while managing dwindling fuel supplies and dodging enhanced enemy defenses. The game's difficulty was legendary, with many players considering it even tougher than its predecessor. Super Cobra was one of the first games to feature a continue system, though with a twist. Players could only continue from specific checkpoints, and the number of continues varied by cabinet setting. The game's success in Japan was so significant that it inspired a wave of similar helicopter-based shooters throughout the early 1980s. Additionally, it was one of the first arcade games to receive multiple home console ports simultaneously, appearing on systems like the Atari 2600, Intellivision, and ColecoVision within months of each other. Rock'n' Rage, 1986. Strutting onto the arcade scene with a guitar in hand and attitude to spare, Rock'n' Rage mixed beat-em-up action with musical mayhem. This unique title cast players as a rock star fighting through streets filled with punk rockers, rival musicians, and bizarre enemies, using nothing but their trusty electric guitar as a weapon. The gameplay brought a fresh twist to the beat-em-up formula by incorporating musical elements into combat. Your guitar could be used as both a melee weapon and a projectile launcher, firing musical notes at enemies when charged. Power-ups came in the form of musical instruments. Drums provided screen-clearing attacks, while keyboards granted temporary invincibility. The combat system was surprisingly deep, allowing players to string together combinations of attacks while dodging enemy assaults. What made Rock'n' Rage particularly memorable was its eccentric enemy design and stage variety. Each level represented a different music scene, from punk-filled streets to disco clubs and heavy metal venues. Boss battles were especially creative, featuring encounters with rival musicians who attacked with their own instrument-based moves. The game's soundtrack matched its theme perfectly, featuring high-energy rock tunes that changed with each stage. Rock'n' Rage was one of the first arcade games to feature a dynamic difficulty system that adjusted based on player performance. If you were doing particularly well, more aggressive enemies would appear, while struggling players would face slightly easier combinations of foes. The game's Japanese version, Komatsu, featured different character designs and a more satirical take on the music industry, while the international release aimed for a grittier, more serious tone. Pooyan, 1982. Armed with a bow and arrows, a determined mama pig defends her piglets from hungry wolves in this charming yet challenging arcade classic. Pooyan turned the simple concept of shooting arrows at ascending and descending wolves into an addictive test of timing and precision that kept players coming back for more. The gameplay mechanics were elegantly simple but devilishly difficult to master. Players controlled a platform carrying Mama Pig up and down the side of a cliff, shooting arrows at wolves who used balloons to float up and down. The wolves weren't just passive targets, they'd throw rocks and shoot arrows back, making defense just as important as offense. The innovative addition of meat chunks that could be shot to lure wolves into specific positions added a strategic layer to the straightforward shooting mechanics. In odd-numbered rounds, players defended against ascending wolves trying to reach the top of the cliff, while even-numbered rounds had them shooting down descending wolves who were using umbrellas to float down. down. Each stage introduced new patterns and challenges, with later levels requiring split-second timing and excellent resource management of your limited arrows. Poyen's success led to it becoming one of the first arcade games to receive a board game adaptation. The game's unique sound effects, particularly the distinctive pop when hitting a balloon, became so iconic that they were reused in several later Konami titles as Easter eggs. The game's name comes from the Japanese word Poyan, which roughly translates to little pig, though many Western players initially assumed it was a made-up word. Amidar, 1982. Paint lines, dodge enemies, and conquer geometric puzzles in this uniquely addictive maze chase game. The abstract concept behind Amidar set it apart from typical arcade fare, challenging players to colour in rectangular segments while avoiding relentless pursuers in an ever-evolving geometric playground. At its core lies a brilliant fusion of strategy and reflexes. Your character must trace the edges of rectangles to fill them in, completing each board piece by piece. The pursuing enemies, a bizarre mix of wild pigs in the jungle rounds and paint rollers in the paint rounds, move along the same lines as the player, but with predictable patterns that clever players could exploit. The ability to jump over enemies added a tactical element that elevated the gameplay beyond simple chase mechanics. Survival demanded mastery of the jump button and the mysterious enemy vulnerability periods. These golden moments occurred after completing specific patterns or collecting special bonuses, temporarily turning the tables and allowing players to eliminate their pursuers. The alternating themes between jungle and paint levels kept the visual experience fresh while maintaining consistent gameplay mechanics. The game's development was initially inspired by Konami's observation of Pac-Man's success, but they deliberately chose to move away from maze chase conventions by implementing the rectangle filling mechanic. The game's name reportedly comes from the Japanese word midakuji, a traditional lottery game involving connecting lines, though this connection remains debated among gaming historians. The unique scoring system, which awarded bonus points for completing rectangles in specific orders, created an entire meta strategy that competitive players still discuss today. Tutankhamun, 1982. Deep within ancient Egyptian tombs lies a maze of treasures, traps, and terrors. This pioneering arcade adventure thrust players into labyrinthine chambers as an intrepid explorer seeking riches while battling supernatural guardians of the pharaoh's wealth. Navigating the catacombs required precise control and strategic thinking. Unlike typical maze games of the era, Tutankhamun limited players to shooting only left or right, never up or down. This restriction transformed every corridor into a tactical decision, timing movements between waves of scorpions, snakes, and other creatures while collecting keys to unlock new passages. The clever mix of combat and exploration created nail-biting moments as players balanced their limited shots with the need to progress. The tomb's mysteries extended beyond mere survival. Each chamber housed valuable treasures that boosted scores, but the real prizes were the special items hidden in specific locations. Flash bombs cleared entire screens of enemies, while extra keys opened shortcuts through the maze. Smart players learned to conserve these resources for particularly challenging sections. Tutankhamun's unusual name stems from a misromanization of King Tutankhamun, creating an unintentionally unique title that stuck. The game pioneered several features rarely seen in 1982, including continuous background music throughout gameplay and a unique wraparound shooting mechanic where bullets would appear on the opposite side of the screen. Perhaps most remarkably, it was one of the first arcade games to feature an ending sequence rather than continuing indefinitely, though reaching it required exceptional skill and patience. Rack 'em Up, 1988. Chalk up your cue and step into the smoky atmosphere of competitive pool halls in this sophisticated billiards simulation. Beyond mere pocket shots, this arcade gem captured the strategic depth and precise physics of real pool, while adding its own arcade flair. The table felt alive with possibilities as balls rolled, spun, and collided with stunning realism for 1988 hardware. Players could execute everything from simple straight shots to complex mass shots and jump balls. The innovative control system utilized a trackball for precise aiming and power adjustment, creating an intuitive interface that both novices and pool sharks could appreciate. 8-ball, 9-ball, and rotation pool variants kept the gameplay fresh, each demanding different approaches and strategies. The real magic happened during multiplayer matches, where psychological warfare became as important as technical skill. Between shots, players could even perform trick shots for bonus points, adding showmanship to the competitive atmosphere. Executing a specific sequence of bank shots would trigger a secret, crazy physics mode where balls behaved according to completely different laws of motion. The development team actually consulted professional pool players during creation, resulting in surprisingly accurate ball physics that pool enthusiasts still praise today. Most remarkably, the game featured a unique chalk meter. Fail to chalk your cue periodically, and shots would become increasingly unpredictable, adding another layer of authenticity to the simulation.
Ready, fire! Fire!
Combat School, 1988. Boot camp meets button-mashing mayhem in this military training simulator turned arcade challenge. Through obstacle courses, target practice, and hand-to-hand combat, recruits face increasingly demanding trials to earn their stripes. Raw athleticism meets precise timing across 7 diverse events. The infamous track and field segments push players through grueling obstacle courses and Ironman races, while shooting ranges test accuracy with both stationary and moving targets. Each event demands mastery of different control schemes, from rapid button tapping for running to precise joystick movements for martial arts sequences. The game's highlight arrives in the form of one-on-one combat sections against your drill instructor. These intense face-offs blend boxing mechanics with military hand-to-hand techniques, requiring players to read opponent patterns while managing stamina. Success means graduation, failure means more push-ups and another run through the course. The Japanese version, known as Boot Camp, features significantly different character designs and a more light-hearted tone. The Western release amped up the military aesthetic and difficulty. Most notably, Combat School pioneered the concept of training mode in fighting games. The instructor battles essentially created a framework that later games would adopt for tutorial sections. The game even included hidden techniques that could only be discovered through specific button combinations during the martial arts segments, predating the complex command inputs that would become standard in fighting games. Hypersports, 1984. Muscles aching and sweat dripping, athletes worldwide flocked to this Olympic-themed sequel that expanded on track and field success with 7 fresh events. Each competition demanded a perfect combo of timing, rhythm, and sheer button-mashing endurance. The diverse event lineup transformed every gaming session into a challenge. Swimming required mastering both speed and breathing rhythm, while skeet shooting tested quick reflexes and precise timing. The long horse vault demanded complex button combinations, and archery challenged players to perfect their timing for the perfect bullseye. Triple jump, weightlifting, and pole vault rounded out the Olympic spectacle, each with its own distinct mechanics. Beneath its competitive surface lurked a treasure trove of hidden bonuses and secret scoring opportunities. Perfect scores in skeet shooting unleashed special duck targets, while precise landings in long horse could trigger bonus items falling from above. The swimming event even featured a surprise frog appearance for tied matches, adding whimsical rewards for skilled performances. Each event contained unique Easter eggs that could boost scores dramatically. Landing on your head in long horse would trigger special bonuses, while hitting specific jump angles in triple jump could summon a rocket for extra points. The game proved so popular, it topped UK gaming charts for 2 months in 1985, and its Commodore 64 version earned a stellar 90% rating from Zap64 magazine. Megazone, 1983. Soaring over futuristic landscapes in this innovative vertical shooter, players navigate branching river paths while battling an army of mechanical eyeballs and high-tech fortifications. Unlike its contemporaries, Megazone broke new ground by offering players choice in their journey through its hostile world. The game's unique path selection mechanic set it apart from other shooters of its era. When rivers forked, pilots could choose their route, adding a strategic layer to the typical shoot-'em-up formula. This wasn't just about dodging bullets, it was about choosing your battles and discovering optimal routes through the mechanical menace. Combat featured a streamlined approach to warfare. Unlike similar games that required different weapons for ground and air targets, Megazone equipped players with a versatile weapon system capable of destroying both types of enemies with the same firepower. The main antagonists, giant robotic eyeballs, would shed teardrops when destroyed, which could be collected for bonus points and screen clearing effects. Megazone pushed arcade hardware to its limits, utilizing 3 different microprocessors to create its complex gameplay systems. The game's sound design was equally ambitious, combining an AY3-8910 PSG with a DAC to create its distinctive audio landscape. This technical sophistication helped earn Megazone a respectable popularity ranking of 16 out of 100 among arcade collectors, marking it as a significant title in Konami's impressive lineup. City Bomber 1987. High above pixelated cityscapes, this arcade title tasks players with precision bombing missions that blend strategy with timing. Rather than mindless destruction, each mission requires careful planning and resource management to achieve specific objectives. The gameplay loop brilliantly balances risk and reward. Players pilot their aircraft through scrolling urban environments, dropping bombs on designated targets while avoiding civilian structures. Each stage presents different weather conditions and wind patterns that affect bomb trajectories, forcing pilots to adjust their timing and approach angles. Success demands more than just good aim. It requires understanding of basic physics and environmental factors. Some levels focus on destroying specific military targets, while others challenge players to create safe evacuation routes through careful demolition. The scoring system rewards precision over destruction, with bonus points awarded for minimal collateral damage and efficient use of limited bombing runs. City Bomber incorporated a revolutionary wind simulation system that was years ahead of its time. The development team studied actual bombing physics to create realistic projectile paths affected by altitude and weather conditions. Most intriguingly, the game featured multiple endings based on overall mission performance and civilian casualty rates, a rare feature for 1987 arcade games. The Japanese version, interestingly, included additional missions and alternate victory conditions that never made it to the international release. Batlantis 1987. Fantasy meets frantic shooting action in this vertical arcade shooter, where players control a lone bowman defending their castle against waves of mythical warriors. Unlike typical space shooters of the era, Batlantis brought the action down to earth with its medieval fantasy setting. The gameplay mechanics centered around precise archery skills. Players moved their archer horizontally across the bottom of the screen, launching arrows upward at advancing waves of fantasy warriors. Power-ups enhanced the basic bow with special abilities, turning routine arrow shots into devastating magical attacks. The game's single-screen format meant every enemy was visible, but that didn't make them any easier to defeat. Each stage culminated in intense boss battles that tested players' shooting accuracy and pattern recognition. The game's detailed graphics brought these fantasy encounters to life, while the soundtrack provided an appropriately epic medieval atmosphere. The difficulty progression kept players engaged, introducing new enemy types and attack patterns as they advanced through the game. Batlantis has become quite uncommon over the years, with only 12 known instances of the machine owned by active collectors. Of these, only 2 are complete cabinets, while the remaining 10 exist solely as circuit boards. The game ranks a mere 4 out of 100 in popularity based on census ownership records, making it one of Konami's more obscure releases of 1987. Black Panther 1987. Not to be confused with Marvel's Black Panther, this one is a rad 1987 arcade game from Konami that never made it to consoles. That's too bad. It would have looked good on the NES. You play as a sleek silver panther, running and swiping at robot enemies with your claws. The game's got all that sweet Sonic-style scrolling and addictive gameplay. There's no story actually. For gameplay, you're basically mindlessly running at full speed, dodging obstacles, and taking down bots with your panther Panther's claws. But watch out, those enemies will ambush you. You've got two moves: swipe attack or jump and swipe from above. But there's the drawback: your attacks are super short range. As you progress, you'll hit thunder spots where lightning strikes, granting awesome power-ups like invincibility or energy beams. Black Panther's 4 stages are notoriously tough to conquer. While the game's generous checkpoint system softens the blow of defeat, the abundance of cheap hits and limited continues can be frustrating. True to Konami's arcade legacy, a la Contra, the game challenges players with a strict continue limit. Boss battles are present, but honestly, there's nothing too memorable. Hyper Crash 1987 Demolition Derby meets Pinball Chaos in this unique arcade hybrid, where cars become the balls and the arena becomes your playfield. Metal crunches and sparks fly as vehicles bounce, crash, and ricochet across specially designed battle arenas. The innovative control scheme puts players in command of both offensive and defensive maneuvers. Using a rotating dial and buttons, drivers must time their crashes for maximum impact while protecting vulnerable spots on their own vehicle. Power-ups scattered across the arena provide temporary advantages, from speed boosts to temporary invincibility. Each arena introduces new hazards and scoring opportunities. Bumpers send cars flying in unexpected directions, while bonus zones reward skilled drivers with multipliers and special weapons. The game's physics engine creates unpredictable chain reactions, where one well-timed collision can trigger a spectacular series of crashes. Hyper Crash utilized a custom-designed physics engine that could handle multiple vehicle collisions simultaneously. Impressive for 1987 hardware. The game's most distinctive feature was its damage modeling system, where vehicles showed progressive wear based on impact zones and collision force. A hidden tournament mode, accessible through a specific button combination at startup, allowed up to 8 players to compete in elimination-style derby matches, though few arcade operators knew about this feature. Crime Fighters 1989 Street Justice meets arcade action in this gritty beat-em-up where vigilantes take on an entire city's criminal underground. Up to 4 players could join forces to rescue kidnapped women from a sinister crime syndicate, each character distinguished only by their differently coloured outfits. The combat system introduced several innovative features for its time. Players could not only punch and kick, but also perform grab moves and continue attacking downed enemies, a mechanic that became a genre staple. Weapons like pipes, knives, and guns could be acquired from fallen foes, though one hit would cause you to drop them. The 4-player version used a unique health system where quarters added hit points that slowly drained over time, similar to Gauntlet. Each stage culminated in boss battles against movie-inspired villains, including parodies of horror icons like Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, and Freddy Krueger. The game's difficulty ramped up significantly in later levels, with the final stage throwing every boss at players simultaneously in an ultimate challenge. Crime Fighters actually had 2 distinct versions, a 4-player and a 2-player variant, with significant differences between them. The 4-player version used 2 buttons and featured limited ammo guns that could be retrieved after being dropped, while the 2-player version added a 3rd button for backward kicks and gave guns unlimited ammo but made them disappear when dropped. The game proved so successful in Japan that it ranked as the 3rd most popular arcade game in August 1989. Devastators 1988. Raw military action explodes across the screen in this run-and-gun shooter that puts players behind an arsenal of heavy weaponry. Unlike its contemporaries, Devastators introduced a unique perspective shift between traditional side-scrolling and into-the-screen segments. Firepower takes center stage through an innovative weapons system. Players start with a standard machine gun, but can acquire flamethrowers, spread guns, and rocket launchers. Each weapon dramatically changes combat tactics. Flamethrowers excel at close range, while rockets prove devastating against vehicles and gun emplacements. The game's signature feature lets players switch between standing and prone positions, affecting both accuracy and vulnerability. Mission variety keeps the action fresh across 6 distinct stages: beach assaults, transition into jungle warfare, urban combat, and mountain operations. Each environment introduces unique challenges and enemy types, from helicopter gunships airships to armored vehicles. The game's difficulty curve masterfully balances challenge with fairness, introducing new threats gradually while keeping players on their toes. Devastators originally began as a sequel to Green Beret Russian Attack, but evolved into its own title during production. The game's unique visual style came from combining hand-drawn backgrounds with digitized sprite animations, a technical achievement for 1988. Most notably, it featured one of the earliest examples of a smart bomb system in a run-and-gun game, where collecting specific power-ups would trigger screen-clearing explosions that became standard in later games of the genre.
The main event.
The main event, 1988. Professional wrestling crashes into arcade action with this over-the-top tribute to sports entertainment. Rather than following traditional fighting game formulas, the main event captures the theatrical spectacle of pro wrestling with its unique tag team mechanics and flamboyant movesets. Inside the squared circle, players choose from 4 distinct wrestlers, each sporting signature moves and fighting styles. The innovative tag team system allows players to switch characters mid-match, maintaining stamina while their partner recovers. Grappling mechanics reward timing and position. Chain wrestling sequences can lead to devastating suplexes, body slams, and the coveted top rope maneuvers. Ring awareness proves crucial as players bounce off ropes, climb turnbuckles, and even take the fight outside. The crowd meter builds with successful moves and taunts, eventually enabling special finishing moves that bring audiences to their feet. Between matches, wrestlers can regain health in locker room bonus stages by rapidly button mashing to consume energy drinks. The main event pioneered several features that became wrestling game standards. It was among the first to implement a fatigue system where tired wrestlers moved slower and had weaker attacks. The game's most unique element was its drama meter. When matches ran long enough, both wrestlers would begin no-selling moves and trading finishers in true pro wrestling fashion. Japanese arcade versions featured different character designs and movesets, reflecting the distinct styles of American and Japanese wrestling. Thunder Cross, 1988. Horizontal shooting action reaches new heights in this space combat spectacular, where players pilot the Thunder Cross fighter against an alien armada. Vibrant visuals and smooth scrolling backgrounds create a cosmic ballet of bullets and explosions. The game's signature option system revolutionizes traditional shooting mechanics. Players collect power-ups to gain up to 4 option units, small companion ships that mirror the main fighter's movements and firepower. These options can be locked in fixed positions or set to rotate around the ship, creating devastating attack patterns. The innovative Thunder weapon system lets players charge their shots for increased damage. Each stage presents a new challenges through distinct environmental hazards and enemy formations. Asteroid fields require precise navigation, while space stations feature claustrophobic corridors packed with turrets and laser grids. Boss battles become epic confrontations against massive mechanical monstrosities, each requiring different strategies to defeat. The game utilized Konami's custom-designed VRC processor to achieve its smooth scrolling and complex sprite animations, a feature that set it apart from contemporary shooters. The most intriguing aspect was its smart bomb implementation, where using a bomb would temporarily slow down time instead of clearing the screen, allowing skilled players to navigate through otherwise impossible bullet patterns. European versions of the game actually ran slightly faster than their Japanese counterparts due to different refresh rates, creating distinct regional playing experiences. And there you have it, 50 of the best arcade gems Konami gifted us over the decades. From pixel-perfect beat-em-ups to quarter-munching shooters, these games didn't just define arcade gaming, they became a rite of passage for gamers everywhere. Konami knew how to keep us glued to the screen, whether we were dodging enemy fire, unleashing combos, or yelling at a friend for taking the last power-up. These classics remind us why arcades were more than just dimly lit hangouts. They were arenas where friendships were forged, rivalries were born, and memories were made. Each game on this list played a role in cementing Konami's legacy as a titan in the gaming world, proving that great gameplay and innovation will always stand the test of time. So, whether you're revisiting these masterpieces or discovering them for the first time, fire up your emulator, dust off your arcade stick, and let the nostalgia take over. Konami may have changed over the years, but their arcade magic magic will forever remain a cornerstone of gaming history. Oh, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you're always the first to know when we drop our next video. Until next time, keep gaming, keep reminiscing, and keep being marvelous.